they're adding an arachnophobia filter where you check that box and it swaps all the spiders out with crabs.
Nice.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 469 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's May 24, 2024.
Nice.
It's actually 22 by 4, but, you know, if you want to know why, you can go back and listen to our New Year's episode. There's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of reasons, but yeah, 22 by 4.
They're all really good and make sense, though. That's the important thing.
Yep.
And don't question it. Also, before we get started, we do have a warning. There will be profanity in this show of the positive kind, but it is profane. So, you know, buckle your pants for that. And we'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your monthly donations to help keep the podcast going. Well, the big news this week, you guys, is, of course, the demo. Mm-hmm. The Crashlands 2 demo, which we released on Tuesday. So let's talk about it.
And we also confused everybody with our last podcast episode, which also released on Tuesday, because that's usually on Wednesdays. There was somebody in the podcast channel was like, I panicked because I thought it must be Wednesday.
Yeah, the thing is, I mean, something that we talked about when we very first started this podcast was we were like, what is it that kind of sinks a podcast? And one of the biggest ones was inconsistency.
Yep.
Like if people can't like know that, you know, oh, it's my Wednesday morning commute, this is when this podcast comes out. If they can't predict that, then they just forget about it. Mm-hmm. Right. So like you got to be part of people's routines if you're doing a podcast. Well, we never break that rule. Like we always try to get an episode out every Wednesday, even if people are gone, we like pre-record stuff or whatever. But this time we were like, you know what?
Let's sync it.
This is special because we linked to the podcast from the main menu of the demo. And we're like,
that was the main reason is we wanted to make sure that people, when they landed on the podcast, if they followed the link, they were like, they weren't just like, what the fuck is this? Because
just us talking about other random bullshit from the games industry or whatever. Yeah, so we wanted like a welcome episode for all the new people. So
honestly, the podcast it's just a long con for us to be able to freak people out every so often. You know, just whenever we feel a little fun, I'm like, you know what? Let's do Tuesday. Let's make it feel like it's Wednesday for some proportion of people around the globe right now. That'd be really good.
It's like in comedy, it's the rule of 3, right? Which is like you establish a pattern by doing something twice, and then the third time is where it goes off the rails. We play the long game, right? So we go 467 episodes consistent, and then bam, 468th one, you switch it up. Keeps people on their toes. Now, when's the next one going to be on a Tuesday? Well, you'll just have to guess.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how the demo went. So first off, we call this kind of a soft launch in the sense that we put the demo up. We did an announcement on Steam, but we weren't, you know, like reaching out to tons of press to announce that it was out or anything like that. It's just like well, for starters, why did we make the demo? Well, we got selected for Steam Next Fest. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be in Steam Next Fest starting June 10th. Which is a big Steam event that promotes a bunch of upcoming games and gets people hyped about them and all that. So we're very psyched about that. But you got to have a playable demo to be in Next Fest. That's what makes Next Fest kind of special. Is like you get to like kind of get a teaser and check out some of these games that are coming for free, right?
This is relatively new to Steam.
It started during COVID.
A couple years ago or something like that. Yes, because historically we've always been like, oh, there's no reason to really have a demo because
it just takes a bunch of time.
It just takes a bunch of time, and I don't think it really does much, you know. But that calculus has changed now that Steam actually has like these demo-based opportunities that you could only do if you've got a demo, and so that was kind of the main rationale for that. But then so that's happening. That's on June 10 is when Steam Next Fest is. But also Steam's doing stuff all the time. They also just happen to have like
Open World
this
Crafting
week
Fest.
while this podcast goes live, Open World Crafting Fest. So it's like 2 weeks before Next Fest, which is just another thing where if you've got a demo, you get to participate, and if you don't, you don't. And of course, Crashlands is a crafting game, so we wanted to participate in that too while we were at it, and so that means we needed to get the demo out early enough to work out any kinks, collect some early feedback, so that for these 2 festivals, it's just ready to go, bulletproof.
Yeah, we're thinking it'll probably be like a ramp, right? Where it's like we essentially did the equivalent of putting it out there.
Yeah.
We just put it out there.
And then the open world crafting fest starts. And then the next fest, which is like the big one, essentially after that. So the goal is basically any of these things that we can find that are consistent points of feedback and kind of low-hanging fruit for us to resolve in that demo should be all nicely buttoned up by the time that final event hits. So
yeah, and during the Survival Crafting Fest, I think this will be the steepest sale that we've ever done for Crashlands. So as this episode goes out, Crashlands is on sale right now on Steam as part of that fest. So if you haven't picked it up yet, now was a pretty good time.
Throw like 3 pennies at the wall and you'll get it.
Just chuck some pennies around the room and Crashlands will appear.
I'm not even sure what it comes out to, but I
think it's like $1.50
or
it's pretty. It's like getting down there. Yeah. And a big part of that is Crashlands 2 is the next installment in the franchise, and we want to build up the hype for that, and the more people we can get into the door with the original Crashlands, the better, right? For
we're on a volume game right now, so it's a different story.
The more the merrier. But we can't do it for free because that changes the calculus of like who comes in, right? So we still want people to decide that they really want to try this game, that it's for them, that kind of thing, which we've talked about in the past of kind of the psychological difference between a free game and a paid game. Even if the paid game is like 10 cents, it's a whole different ball game. So let's talk about some numbers of what the demo's done so far. So we had no idea what to expect because like these guys were saying, we just put it out there.
This is also our first like demo.
We've never done a demo
in this context.
So we're not going to say exactly how many people have played it because we don't know what those numbers mean or whether we'll need to use them for something. But we do have some pretty fun general statistics, which is that the demo came out on Tuesday, so about 72 hours ago. So in that time, people playing the demo have accrued about 460 days of playtime, something like 660,000 minutes or so. It's quite a bit, and it's been interesting because the demo is capped. Like you can't you can play the demo forever, but you'll run out of stuff pretty fast. Like you can't really get into the later tiers of materials and recipes. And so the number of things you can craft is very small. You can't get that much stuff to decorate your base. There's no farming or pets or fishing. Like it's in the game, but you can't get to it through the demo. And so, we're thinking that, your experience probably caps out at around like 1.5 to 2 hours in terms of you've seen most of what the demo has at that point.
We're trying to be thorough about it, basically. See all the nooks and crannies.
Yeah. And so the median playtime kind of reflects that, where our median playtime is about 52 minutes. So about half of people played more than that, half of people played less than that. Some people will pick up a demo and they'll pick it up just to like poke around in the game a little bit and kind of see if like right out of the gate it's something that they would want. But then if it is something they want, they'll just put it aside, wishlist the full game and wait till the full game comes out, which is something that like that can pull the median down in terms of playtime. But overall, I think it's pretty solid.
That's a very healthy. That's a very healthy. And that was kind of our target, was around an hour, just based on some older data, but Chris Sikowski, who runs the How to Market a Game blog, has a post called Benchmarks about demo performance and these fests and how that then correlated to the game's eventual sales. And kind of what you see there is that essentially if you could pump up to like around an hour or so, really anything over, I think it's like 40 minutes or something like that, you're then in like the top tier of people actually playing the demos, right?
It's
like
a good signal.
It's a really good signal. So I'm very pleased with that. And that'll continue to tick up over time, which is nice too. So that's mainly what I've been personally most.
I think it's gonna have that weird combo, right? Because after the first day, the median was it was like an hour 10 or something like that.
It only had
a little lower,
but it's because of how the time split on that. Where actually there were only in the back end, I looked at it, there were only 60 something. Like must have split like right around the time the demo launched or something.
So it was just a small sample size.
It was mostly QA who was like pulling up that far end of it.
So, we got to filter our results.
Yeah, well, because that's the other thing that's interesting about like trying to guess what's going to happen when we're looking at these things, right? Because like Seth was saying, people will pop in and out of a demo for lots of reasons. And so it's hard to interpret what does it mean that people played for that long. And also the demo is kind of capped. So it truly runs out of stuff in 2 to 4 hours, depending on how.
Well, and it'd be the case that it's not even about running out. It's that like within probably an hour, you'll start running into the first things that you can't do. Right?
Yeah,
so
even a half hour if you're playing like really aggressively.
So you had a quest and suddenly like a pop-up menu appears. It's like, hey, you've reached the end of what's available for this story for the demo, right? So like potentially even like the first 1 or 2 times you see that, you'll start to be like, okay, well, like I'm starting to hit the bounds here, so I'll just wait.
Yeah, because it's only kind of like the hardcore players who are like really excited about Crashlands already, or who just like really like what they're getting into, that then want to get everything out of it, and so you have that, and then you also have different populations of people, right? Because when we first put it out, we immediately got a huge spike of basically all of our Chinese audience who was just like waiting for the game to appear, right? And then once that initial big spike went off, the next spike was lower, and then the US sort of more centric spike was not as big because they don't have this. We didn't have the same means of like telling that community that it was available, right? And so we had these like different patterns of like this first group of people were basically waiting for it. It's the pre-existing fans of the game, right?
Yeah.
So presumably that's going to pull our median up, right? And then once we start participating at these festivals where the game goes out to random people who don't even know about the franchise, that's going to be like the real test of how is this. Because the first one's
stay above 40 minutes.
Yeah, because the first one's kind of the test of like for people who are already into the franchise, does this work? Does it feel like a Crashlands game? Do they like it? Do they want to play it? And so that signal there is pretty clearly yes, and that's fantastic. And then the festival test is basically, what about the randos though? Does that still hold true, or how far down does that median get pulled? Yeah. So it'll all be really interesting to kind of see. But I think it's that constant reminder until we look at any of these numbers for anything. Like there's just never, ever a single number you could ever look at that has an unambiguous explanation.
Yeah, there's no clean interpretation.
What does this mean, and what does it imply about the future? Yeah, you just don't.
I mean, even in the case of the demo, we don't do most demos, and Steam recommends you preserve save progress right from the demo to whenever the game launches. Yeah. But in our case, the reality is we're still building out so much of the game world that there's a possibility that we will have to do some kind of other additional layer of save compression or something.
We don't want to worry about backwards compatibility.
Yeah, so we were like, okay, we're just not going to do that. So that's also a factor with all these things. We're just like, if there's a big sign on the front of the game, basically when you boot it up, that's like your save will not be preserved. Which pushes people in certain directions. So none of the stuff is clean, but I think just looking at, even given all the caveats there, just looking at the both the median playtime and the overall very positive response to the thing has been really nice. And we've addressed most of that like kind of low hanging fruit feedback to punch certain things up a little bit for the next round. But there's been no critical error, it seems like to me, as far as how the design is meeting the market. You know what I mean? Yeah,
there's some refinements I think that people are wanting that's warranted in terms of just like how a few things feel, or like for me, one of the interesting ones was people talking about wanting the harvesting of static resources to feel more impactful, which is pretty interesting because, how do I put this? So in Crashlands 1, we had a scale problem where everything was the same size.
Yep.
So like you chop a tree, that tree is the same size as you. You fight a creature, the creature is basically the same size as you. Everything's kind of the same. Yep. So yeah, and so the components that come out of that resource are also almost the same size as that resource. So in the first game, if you exploded like a log tree, then it felt like a real shower of loot flew out of it because giant logs the size of that tree flew out, right? And so in Crashlands 2, we actually have a variety of scales. So we have larger trees and things that are 2x2 grid spaces instead of 1x1, or even 3x3.
Yeah, but they still drop the amount of loot that they would have if they were just 1x1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and the loot's little, right? So yeah.
Yeah, so like you take a few swings to chop down this big tree, and it's like boom, and like we got like some smoke and like particles kind of fly out, but then like 2 pieces of little bark just kind of fly out, right? And we were like, you know what? Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair point of feedback. And so we went through and just like doubled the number of loot drops from most of the larger resources, and also punched up the like visuals on like little like particle trails following the loot.
Yeah, how spectacularly things explode. Basically, got a little
because we can do that because our game Crashlands 2 auto adjusts the recipes. So like whatever the loot drops are, like the recipes just adjust to compensate, and so we can change any of those things on the fly and just see how it feels. And if it feels good, and we ship it. So we get some changes like that are coming down the pipe for an updated version of the demo. Once we get that through QA.
Good couple rounds QA.
We got to be pretty thorough with it because the previous version of the demo was built maybe like 5 or 6 weeks ago, and we're constantly updating game systems and mechanics and all kinds of things. And so we got to be careful with it. So that's been pretty cool. But overall, like the feedback has been very good and has made us think a lot about certain things, and other things we're like, damn, yep, we knew that was going to work, and it worked. Mm-hmm. I also want to say, as a cool statistic, the Explungus is the most murdery thing in the game right now, or in the demo right now.
If you haven't played yet, the Explungus is a fungus-like plant-like thing. It's not actually a resource because it doesn't drop anything, I don't think, right?
It does eventually.
Okay, yeah, but at the beginning of the game it does not. But it's a fun mechanic that you're introduced to basically immediately, where it's just an exploding thing. So if anything hits it, whether it's a creature or you, right, it kind of a timer starts, it shows you a little warning area, and then it explodes in a huge radius and does a fuckload of damage, right? And so the first time you see it, you don't actually know what it is or that's going to do that. And so if you go try to harvest it, you're going to get blown up, right? Is basically what's going to happen.
Yeah. And if you're quick on your feet, you can definitely juke out of the blast radius, but you have to recognize that's what's happening.
Yeah.
And
because it's kind of right on the edge there, So
I think the median time to death is 10 minutes. Basically.
Yeah. It's probably the first time somebody sees an Explungus and tries to harvest it. This is going to be what it is.
Because also you can kind of you can watch animals interact with it. So if you're lucky, the first time you see an Explungus will be when a Slugabun tries to bite it and blows itself up.
Yeah.
But you also have to be paying enough attention to recognize that explosion is like that's what happened. Because something that has been really interesting when it comes to kind of new player feedback is like when you're first starting to play the game, you don't know anything. Mm-hmm. You don't know anything about the controls, about the UIs, about the creatures, the world, anything. And we're trying to sort of drip feed you either hints about what to do, or we directly tell you what to do. But we have to be really careful about how we meter that out, because if we say too much, then it's overwhelming and people just immediately tune out, right? And the amount of like new things people can recognize is kind of rate limited, right? And so as somebody's kind of like first encountering an Explungus, they're doing so when like they just got their first chopper, they're venturing into a new space that they haven't been before, they're not that familiar with the UI, and even if an Explungus blew up right next to them caused by something else, they may not have even seen it happen because their brain is just so overloaded that they can't kind of pick up on that stuff just yet. So those are the kinds of things where like, we expect that to happen, but also it's kind of intended that like people hit that thing for the first time and get blown up, and then they see the death sequence for the first time, stuff like that. So it's all an intended part of the experience.
Part of the plan,
Yeah. I think there are kind of two interesting takeaways there. I think one of them is very brief, which is just this is why it's also so important to get randos to playtest the game, right? Because everybody in our team is intimately familiar with Explungus, right? Everybody. Yeah. That's not a surprise that can happen on the team anymore. It was something that could happen like a year ago or more, right? Which means the fact that actually almost every new player probably gets killed by Explungus within like 10 minutes into the game is something that we're not going to ever experience. Like that's not what's going to happen in any of our playtesting, any of our QA, any of our dev work, right? And so that's one of those things where like if you forget that that's true, then you can start making design decisions that don't take that kind of thing into account, right? Yeah. And not that specifically, but that whole idea of like you become fully blind to some of the things of the game that people are not going to understand when they are seeing it for the first time.
Yeah, especially for the new player experience. You want to be doing everything on purpose, even if it is killing someone in this case, right?
Yep.
It is on purpose to be like, want you to see early that you can and will die, and that also is fine and fun and just part of the shtick. That way you're not too careful, you know.
But it is a funny thing, right? Because I wasn't part of that design stuff in the earlier days about like how do we kill the player for the first time, right? But I already know what Explungus was, and so in my own playing, like I instantly was like, oh, I gotta be careful around Explungus, right? And so that also meant when I was writing up documentation for the localization team, and in particular loc QA, to basically say, here's how to test the game. I was like, I need to make sure that you die also, right? Which is true. Like that wasn't incorrect. But it didn't even cross my mind that like
that you could easily do it.
That you could easily
there.
do walking into Explungus and just like doing it. And also it didn't occur to me that would probably just happen anyway, right?
Yep.
Because in my own playtesting,
we, like, as devs, we just kind of rarely die.
Yeah.
And, once you know the game, you just stop killing yourself on things. But there's also like a statistical sampling problem here that's really interesting too. Because if we go look at our stats now and we look at deaths, Explungus kills people more than anything else in the game in the demo right now.
Yeah, right now. Yep.
Right. So does that mean that Explungus is too hard for players to deal with? No, it just means they just don't know what it is the first time they encounter it and they don't react to that quickly. But again, by design, right? And so what we found, like when we did our playtest in I think it was October when we did our internal playtest, Explungus killed a lot of people then too. But as people accrued more playtime, Explungus got overtaken by other things, by
mostly.
Creatures that are actually like more aggressive and harder to deal with, and that you come across quite a bit because people will die to Explungus once or twice in their entire gameplay,
and then sort of like on accident, maybe every like 5
by
hours
being greedy, like you'll trigger one on purpose, and then maybe like a creature hits it before to finish it off before you could get away, just small things like that. But yeah, so that's kind of another interesting note about the demo is that some of the feedback that we get, we have to try to tease out whether or not the feedback is because it's a demo or whether it's like a real thing. So if somebody says, I want to be able to like this aspect of the game isn't interesting enough for me, and I want it to be more complex and do more things, right? It's like, well, we've purposely kept a lot of things more simple in the first hour or two of gameplay because, again, like we can't hit people with everything at once. So
it is a demo. Also, we don't want to.
Right? Yeah, and so there's a lot of things that people are expressing that they want to have, which the game actually does have, but it just doesn't have them quite yet. Yeah. Right. It's in the game, point, right? Just not in the demo.
Yeah. So, because if a player plays to the end of the demo, then like that's when they go leave feedback, right? Normally what a player will do is they'll leave feedback once they have a strong feeling about something, or when they've played it a lot, right? Or played till the very end of the actual game, right? And so Seth, to your point, like when you're getting the feedback, and if that's kind of an artificially created thing, is going to dramatically impact the shape of that feedback. Because all these kinds of things you're saying, it's like if the player could play for another, because they weren't having a bad time, they were just starting to feel
they just wanted more of something.
It was becoming, they were just like, oh, I get it, and then nothing new happened, right? But if they had access to more content, new stuff would have happened, and then that would have gone away, right? And so trying to tease this thing out, I think is, and we talk about this all the time about how hard it is to do things with feedback, right? Yeah, and this is a good example of like
the essence of it,
of why. Of how it can become even weirder and more challenging in these kind of constrained circumstances of trying to get feedback on an incomplete part of the game. It's extremely difficult to tease apart what's real, what'll go away, right? And you just have to guess, but do your best.
Yep. So we're keeping an eye on all that feedback, and big thanks to our players who've taken the time to comment so we have a little forum in the Discord. We've also got an online feedback forum thing. So a lot of our players have taken the time to do all that, and we appreciate that quite a bit. So I guess any final thoughts on the demo before we move on to questions?
I'm curious to see
how pretty
it
cool.
Yeah.
The only thing that was really a problem is that fucking opening cutscene, which is a video that plays that we've just been fighting the whole time to get it to like work on every device all the time, right? And so that was the only like thing I was annoyed about. It was like, because the video for like a lot of people is just offset from the audio by variable amounts.
It's not even offset. It just plays at a different speed than the audio.
Is that what it is?
So it starts synced up, but then by the time they get to the end, it's like if the video's playing at like 2/3 speed, but we can't figure out what makes that happen because it's just like random combinations of it's like CPU, GPU, drivers, operating system versions. I don't know. Yeah. So we'll be working with the game maker team because this is part of the game, like the game maker engine is its video playing capabilities.
But it has been funny because like the whole, I think we talked about this a while ago too. Like we did the cutscene in video because we're like, oh yes, finally we have video support. So that's an easier way to just like play a video in the game. That's an easier way to do it than try to like what we did in the past where we just literally animate everything, right? Mm-hmm. And then it's been interesting how it's created just this endless sort of tech battle with the engine to get it to work.
It should be easier than everything else, but it has not been.
Yeah. So, well, we'll figure it out. There's plenty of time before launch for us to get that fixed, but it might be the case that the demo is just going to have a janky video. Whoops. Can't do anything about it. Yep. All right, let's get on to questions. These questions come from our listeners over at podcast.bscotch.net. And the highest upvoted question for today's episode comes from Belkmaster 5000.
Belkmaster.
So I assume they murdered the other 4,999 Belks.
Yep.
And have assumed the title of Belkmaster 5000.
Or they are a piece of exercise equipment.
One of the two.
Yeah. It's for when you need to bulk up, which is when you bulk up, but purely from consuming milk. All right. So Belkmaster 5000 says, an earlier episode discussed demos in Steam Next Fest, and it sounds like Steam has some requirements or programs that participation is strongly encouraged. I'm looking to learn more about those programs or requirements and what they are. How would you approach that task?
It's pretty slick on the Steam backend. Once you have like your backend Steam account, they have really good documentation about all of these things. So you can basically get all the answers to kind of the nitty gritty questions about this there. And honestly, it is very good documentation. It's one of the few places where it's like pretty airtight, which would make sense because, there's thousands of games releasing every month now. But beyond that, I think that the high level is basically just that nowadays, if you want to do any of the fests as an unreleased game, you need a demo. That's kind of it. I think if you're doing the fest, otherwise you generally are suggested to do a discount, but like that's kind of it. Like that's the thing. And
because I think Steam Next Fest requires you to have a demo, or that you can you do it if you're just launching, or is it only for demos?
It's only for upcoming stuff. So a lot of games will launch right after, and that's their suggestion. Steam's suggestion for Next Fest as like generally is to try to do it before essentially like the Next Fest closest to your launch, right? Typically. And that's just you can only do one, so that kind of it makes some kind of sense, right? To try to do it around the time when launch is happening to ride whatever momentum you get out of it. But they don't enforce that by any stretch. So you can do it earlier. Obviously, you can't do it later because once you're launched, you can't not do it at Next Fest. But you definitely want to do one because of.
I think Steam does a good job with their recommendations of trying to tell you what they think will work best, right? Because like the reason they tell you, oh, you should do the one that's closest to your launch, is not because they've like just decided that that's how it's supposed to go or whatever. It's because they believe that for whatever reason that's going to give you the best outcomes, right? But as we know from doing data stuff, and as we also know from talking to people at Valve, everything's unclear all the time. So even all the best recommendations and best practices that Steam gives you, which again they do a better job than I think any of the platforms. They're still all best guesses, which is important to remember as you're doing stuff.
I've always thought that the best demonstration of why all this is really complicated and hard to understand is that Valve themselves released the game Artifact on Steam and couldn't really make it succeed. So even with all the data in the world about every game ever and owning the platform and being able to promote their own game on their own platform, well, it's just there's also more to it than that, right? Like it's even about like what even is the game, and is it obviously does it have a hook that people want? There's so many layers to it, but Steam does make it more than most other platforms, Steam makes it pretty clear and easy on their back end of kind of how to get into this stuff.
With the exception that they have two separate back ends still, because they have a legacy back end for your financial stuff and like active player stats and retail units sold and that kind of thing, wish lists, like that kind of stuff, right? And that thing hasn't changed.
It hasn't changed since we launched the original Crashlands.
Yeah, the other
8 years ago.
Like the newer front end just keeps getting better. It's like fucking slick. It's polished. It's easy to find stuff. It's like they've done really careful design work to make it like Sam was talking about the event management stuff. Mm-hmm. It's real fucking slick actually. Like it shows you like here are the dates you could go on sale. You could just
here when you're clever stuff when you are out there. And I'm like, how come we can't get this in the financial reports? You guys,
every time I have to touch that other backend website, it's not as bad as trying to log into a Microsoft service, which is the worst experience on the whole internet. But it's like, it's right underneath that in terms of like, I'm always like, how the fuck do I get to the thing I'm looking for? And it's just impossible.
It's very challenging. But yeah, getting into the events is, you're good to go with that stuff.
Anything that's in the new Steam front end or the new Steam back end, like real
the Steam back end front end.
The front end of the back end.
Yeah. All right. Next question comes from OopkooPadwinna, who says, I liked your perspective on patents a few episodes ago. Another argument I've heard is that goons like Elon Musk, dislike patents because to file one, it's required to reveal the technical details publicly. Now they can strike it up to business critical information and keep it private. Do you think there's any merit to this claim of the benefit of patents?
I don't really care about what Elon Musk thinks about anything. If I'm going to be honest,
anything at all.
He's so. I guess it's almost like he kind of clamps onto like a conceptual piece of something and then takes it. So it's like it's how to put it. The thing he's articulated here, I would say, sounds like it could make some sense, but it's Elon Musk saying it. So I don't think...
You gotta be suspicious.
Yeah, I don't think that he knows actually what he's talking about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, if this is what he said, that he doesn't like patents because then you have to reveal technical details publicly, that's true to an extent. You don't have to reveal all of the technical specs of something to have a patent on it. It's very much about like the concept of the thing at the core.
But also, if that's your worry, because the question is, what are you trying to patent? Where your patent would make it so that people can now steal it, but you not having a patent at all wouldn't, right? As in, like, are you making is it impossible to reverse engineer the thing that you're making? Right?
Yeah, that's it.
And the answer is no.
The answer is no. And is it really the case? Because a patent, as Seth was saying, like a patent doesn't literally have like every single detail about how the thing is constructed or made. It has to have just enough to, and in fact, actually, the less you can get away with, the better, because that makes it
more broad.
You get to sue more people when you get to claim their infringement of your patent, right? So I think that's kind of a bullshit claim from top to bottom, really.
Well, but also it doesn't, like, in my mind, like, patents just don't really matter anymore. They just don't. I mean, if it takes about 3 years on average, I think, as it did back, a little while back when I was learning more about this stuff. It takes about 3 years on average to get your patent through the system. Tech is moving real fast.
Yeah, I think it's actually not for. It's sort of like
I don't think
talk about press and stuff. They're not necessarily for what they're advertising themselves as for. So if it's this idea of actually being able to protect your some new things, some new engineering, whatever else, like I said, that's so slow that it's kind of hard to see that as actually true. But if you're talking to investors or you're talking to a venture capital firm, something like that, if you say we have a patent, or you say patent pending, again, it's a different. You're using that piece as a little bit of a like credibility booster. We're very serious about this thing.
Yeah, you get to use the fact that other people don't understand patents.
Yeah, correct. But we also now live in a world where, like, let's say we came up with some new kind of tech that it turns out like it's just a software kind of a concept, some kind of an algorithm or whatever, right? And we start a patent on that thing, and then maybe in a year and a half, we find out that Google starts doing the same thing, right? Within the next year and a half, while we're waiting for our patent to go through, Google integrates that thing into everything that they're doing, blah blah blah, and then suddenly we get our patent, and we go, all right. Now we sue Google for damages, right? So we do that. Google settles. They'll pay us some chunk of money. And then Google just keeps on using our idea. Because for a giant company like this, whether it's a fine from the EU for violating consumer protection laws or whatever, the punishment for anything is always just the cost of doing business. It's just a fine. They just pay some cash.
Yeah. So I'd say
and act with impunity.
Yes, I guess my just high level take on it is that one, Elon Musk can't be trusted. And two, I'm also not a patent attorney. So, we talk.
Patents can't be trusted either.
Patents,
trust nothing and no one.
It's like the purpose of these things may not be exactly what you think they are in certain contexts. And that's the thing to keep an eye on.
Yeah. And there are like narrow categories where I think.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
I don't think there's any category where patents are actually a good thing, but I think there are narrow categories where patents are do actually something for like a business and for that kind of thing, right? Mostly in ways that are the outcome is gross, like medical patents and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. There are, I think, a domain where, but I think it is the weird thing about it, right? Because like for a lot of the kinds of things that people patent, the reason that they haven't been invented yet is because there's something really hard about it, right? Yeah. It's pretty rare that it's like just a really good idea and trivial to implement. That's pretty fucking rare, right? Mm-hmm. So it's mostly because you've spent an enormous amount of resources like figuring something out, and then you want to take it to market, but want to make sure that by the time you get it to market, because again, really costly and hard to do, right? That someone can't come in and just be like, "Oop, mine now," right?
Mm-hmm.
But for so much stuff though, like if it's possible for somebody to just come swoop in and do it, then they just will, because you're competing in a global market. And like Seth said, it's the cost of doing business to lots of other companies. So like, it's not that protective, although it could give you a source of income via lawsuits.
Oh, yeah. Again, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's not necessarily you wouldn't want to do it. It's just that it might be.
But if you got a hard enough thing, but if you got a hard enough thing to make, so like take like the iPhone. That thing doesn't need a fucking patent, right? Because who's going to build? Nobody can build the iPhone, right? The amount of resources you need, like Apple has like a whole, like corner the entire market. Like they have basically rented out the output of like every chip manufacturer for a certain kind of chip in the whole fucking world, right? And like this kind of thing, right? They could put everything about how the iPhone is made just online with step-by-step instructions, how to build one by hand yourself, right? And it wouldn't fucking matter.
Nobody else has the tools for it, basically.
Nobody else has the tools and the scale to actually pull it off. And so I think, to me, this is where, and that's where I think a lot of patents are just kind of decorative, if you're operating at that scale.
Else, you know what I mean? It's like it's not for the thing it's advertised for.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well, it's often about it's about a specific facet of something. So like you wouldn't say like, oh, I patented the iPhone, but maybe there's like some new type of like circuit or some kind of new material that you figured out that you're going to use in the iPhone. So you patent that thing. And so like one of the more famous patent cases was when the Wright brothers were suing. There were like several different aeronautics manufacturers that started popping up once they, figured out how to fly planes. But the Wright brothers, they used this thing called wing warp to steer the plane, where the plane's wings were flexible.
Twist.
Yeah, and so you'd pull these levers and it would like twist the wings, and that was how you could turn. And then different companies figured out the concept of ailerons, little flaps on the wings that just pop up and down with hydraulics or whatever. And you use that instead of just twisting the whole wing. And so there's a huge legal battle where the Wright brothers were like, well, I mean, yes, we patented wing warp, but like really the essence of the patent is being able to steer a plane,
by shifting.
That's a hard
wind to take the wind.
That's a hard.
Yeah. And I can't remember. It's been a while since I've studied that case. I can't remember what the actual outcome of it was, but it's just like, it's those kinds of interesting questions where like they didn't patent airplanes. Right. That wasn't actually the killer invention that made flight possible, because like people could make paper airplanes and like little little things that could glide or fly. It was controlled flight that was the real problem, right? Mm-hmm. And so they try to patent that aspect of it, but it's very difficult,
Yeah. Well, and to me, that's the kind of the crux of it, is like the whole point of a patent is supposed to be that it promotes innovation because it gives you a temporary monopoly on the thing that you invented, right? Mm-hmm. But it also stifles it because now nobody else could use that thing, even if they already were, because patents aren't literally like, I'm the one who came up with it. That's just not how it works, right? So, and if the thing that you come up with is a fundamental, like, world changing thing, you can then lock down the whole world's improvements for
20 years.
20 years. You could just be like,
which that's the kicker here, because like 20 years ago, YouTube appeared. Yeah. Like that's how long 20 years is in today's world, right? It's like, it's so fucking long ago that it was a whole different world back then. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so, I don't know, the whole thing, like IP law in general has not adjusted at all to the pace of technological change.
It was dubious from the
always
beginning at best. But but today, the way that the technology works today and the way that intellectual property works today, it's just
they're just operating in two different spheres almost.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. All right. Next question comes from SnowyBeef, who says, with the Game Changer tool you talked about in episode 458, are you planning on adding a feature in Crashlands 2 that allows players to create their own creature or object? Yeah, so this is an interesting one. Yes, this is about, it's kind of about modding. So something that I personally would like to do, if we can swing it before launch, is to not necessarily like develop tools in the game directly to have players do this kind of stuff, because that's a whole can of worms that we don't want to get into. But to basically make it so that the game is able to pick up stuff. Like hoover up files or things, like basically like create a directory that the player can put their own stuff in there, and then the game would interpret that and let you play like that version of the game. Because what we've kind of found is, we've exposed the guts of the game's data in a big old JSON file, and so everything that describes how the game comes together and all the different creatures and mechanics and AI and everything, it's all in that file. So what we're expecting is that some of our more tech savvy players are going to dig into that file, reverse engineer it. People reverse engineered, like even in Levelhead, where the levels were stored in a compressed, non-human readable binary file. People figured out how to reverse engineer that and make their own editors for it, right?
That was pretty spectacular, to be honest.
Shocking. And so like if people can do that, they can definitely do that with this human readable JSON file that's just sitting there with all the game's data.
Well, there is the other part too, which is because that's like the stuff that describes like basically the rules for how stuff works, and then provides non-map content, all the dialogue and all that stuff.
Because there's actually two files.
There's two files, and the other one is another weirdo binary file, like the Levelhead one. And so that's gonna be I think that's gonna be the interesting thing is there's multiple things here. So I agree with Seth that it would be cool if we could provide a way for the game to like adapt to things that players are trying to add, right? So that can be possible. So they could basically modify this more human readable. It's still not easy to read, right? But this more human readable data to add stuff and have like their own art assets or whatever. Like that'd be very cool. What we probably will not do is do any work trying to make it so that you can edit the campaign file, which is the binary thing that describes the world, all the stuff, where all the stuff is, all the triggers for campaign events, all that kind of stuff. But someone's going to reverse engineer that shit. Yeah. And it'll be really cool if the game could support where it'd be like, I just load the file and try to do stuff, right? And which it does already, right? Mm-hmm. So if players do figure that stuff out, then basically Crashlands 2 becomes a game engine where
mod support,
it's primed for it.
Yeah, so the way we set it up was kind of purposely so that we could tip into that kind of modding stuff without having to do an overhaul or something like that. I think for me, as far as like when modding shows up on priorities, is in a post-launch sphere. It's literally not worth putting any energy into until you know if the game is doing well or not.
Thriving. Yep. Because it is the case that modding can definitely help a game's longevity and have it it can boost the tail dramatically, and it can bring in some players who otherwise wouldn't, but that's, I think, a tiny proportion. It's just not likely that somebody gets a game because it has modding. They'll get the game because they think the game looks cool, and then it might be an extra selling point that has modding, but that's not really the make or break it deal, So the effort that goes into making modding possible, if that's not going to make the game become successful if it wasn't going to be. So it doesn't really hurt you to not have it at launch and to not put that investment up front.
And honestly, I don't know of any games personally that I've seen that actually have the modding within the game. Like mod support just means that, like, the game is set up such that you can create files or like add stuff to it.
And so you can edit the files that are there, and the game won't break. Or it won't break unless you do something that's invalid. But because some of them will also protect the files in some way, so that they're storing some kind of a token that represents the contents of the file, so they can tell if it's changed. And we've done this kind of stuff in the past too, right? So there are things that a game can do to intentionally prevent people from modifying stuff or to obfuscate things, so it's really hard, right? And we are not doing either of those things because, in general, we think for a single player game, people should just be able to do what they want. But that's a different thing from intentionally making it easy, right? Because you have the whole spectrum of, like, I intentionally make it hard, or it's possible, but I didn't really do anything one way or the other, right? And which is kind of more where we are, up to we intentionally made it easy.
And there's kind of degrees here, because in the first Crashlands, we were considering opening up the Crashlands creator, which is what we used to make the campaign in the first game.
The old game changer.
Yeah, and open that up so that players could use that tool to make their own campaigns, and then even to look at other people's campaigns. But as we kind of found with Levelhead, right? Like, as soon as you have user-generated content, you've got a lot of new problems.
Yeah, I would love that to be a platform problem, not our problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's why, like, if Steam Workshop has, mod support or whatever, right? Then it's like, let Steam handle it, all that stuff. All the game knows is, I just read files. I'm not doing anything. Developers are hands off with it. We don't have to develop any interfaces or, like, teaching tools to teach people how to make, just, like, let the players figure it out amongst themselves, and the game will just respect it.
Which is also it's also back to IP law again, right? Because if you allow players to, if you allow players to write anything they want to just with text, now you've got a moderation problem you got to deal with. If you allow players to add image-based content of whatever kind they want, then now you have an intellectual property problem, where if somebody's going to be like, I want to put my favorite Nintendo characters in here, I want to put my favorite whatever characters in here, right? And now, depending on exactly how that's being done and what you as a developer's relationship is to how that content is managed. Like, if you make it easy and have, like, here's our web
on our own servers.
We have our own servers where we store it and we sync it across your devices and we do all this kind of stuff, right? Then now all of a sudden we're liable for any intellectual property infringement that players do, right?
Yeah. Hard pass.
So no thanks on that one.
Hard pass. All right. Next question comes from Disgruntled Pineapple, who says, "Hey guys, what is the importance of sound design in games? Can sound make or break any game? Does it depend on the game, or does it just not matter all that much?" So I'd say it matters a lot, but players have strange relationships with audio.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is not
as in some players. Yeah. Players will sometimes treat it as like some players will treat all audio stuff as basically optional. Right.
They'll just mute the game and like listen to a podcast or watch Netflix or something.
I think it's one of those things that like I don't know, certain aspects of animation or something like that. If you aren't paying attention to it, then it sometimes may not seem like it would matter or that it's there, right? But then if you don't have it and you have the, like, sort of before and after of having it or not having it, it's very obvious that it's doing a lot of work. It's just that it's a less tangible piece, if that makes sense.
Yeah, when it's done well, it makes everything feel better.
Yeah,
right, and be better. But yeah, it's a weird category of thing. I know I personally have I historically was on the kind of the meh side of audio in games, which is mostly because, like, I always found the audio balance to be unpleasant in every game I ever loaded. I didn't need the music. Because I was trying to hear the sounds of the game. And in so many games, the music doesn't feel like it has a relationship to what's happening in the game in a meaningful way. That's definitely not always true, but it's true for a lot of games, at least how I experienced it. And so the first thing I would, like, always do every time I booted up a game was, like, turn the music way down, you know? And then often I'd be, like, trying to talk to people, do their stuff while I'm playing it too. And so then I would also, like, knock the rest of the sound way down. And historically, that was how I played games. But it wasn't until really, like, I think Levelhead, where we started, because we tried to do sound well all the way through, but, like, Levelhead was where we really started paying attention and listening to Fat Bard when they told us they wanted to do lots of different things, you know. And it wasn't until that time when I started, like, paying attention to it because were decided to pay attention to it. Then I started playing games and respecting by default the sound stuff that was in there, and trying to immerse myself in it. And I also realized a lot of that too is just because of like, historically I would just have speakers up, right? Mm-hmm. And that's such a different experience from putting on headphones and like actually being immersed, and so once I started to try to like appreciate it for what it was, I was like, I see. You really do get the whole actually full experience. It adds a lot.
It's the intended experience, and sound is used for all kinds of mechanics, like in Crashlands 2, if you're playing without sound, you're going to have a hard time finding all the juice gems.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I will go into too much detail about it, but juice gems are valuable in Crashlands 2, and you want to find all of them. But a lot of them are hidden or kind of like lurking on the periphery of various things, but you can hear them making this kind of like ethereal tinkling
siren's call pulling you somewhere else. Yeah, it's great. It works.
Yeah, so like if you have your sound off, you won't get those audio cues, or even just like when you enter a space and it starts raining and just like hearing the rain on the ground. Like there's all these little or like there's certain creepy places in Crashlands 2, or when you enter them, the ambient sounds of nature just go away.
Yeah.
It's fucking eerie, right?
But if they were never there in the first place, you wouldn't get to experience it.
It takes away so much of the effect, right? So
I think it's
all of that said, you can also break the fuck out of a game if you do something wonky with the audio, which we've experienced during Crashlands 2's development, where there'll be like some sound that a creature makes or that something happens that starts to drive people insane as they're playing the game, right? And that's kind of the interesting thing about it's kind of a fragile system because people are really sensitive to sound, but also differentially in like very variable ways, right? And so one person can get really annoyed by something that somebody else doesn't, and so on and so forth, or if thinks something's too loud and so on, right? But it only takes one thing bothering you from a sound perspective, before you're like I gotta mute all of this,
Yeah.
So it can be pretty tough, but also like it's not just sounds. People have different things that they respond to strongly. So something that I thought was kind of interesting is the new WoW expansion is under development. I think it's coming out this fall or early winter or something like that. And I think most or all of the expansion takes place inside the planet. So they have all these really cool zones where like one of them is like a giant underground cave that has some kind of a huge glowing crystal coming down through the ceiling, which kind of represents like the sun basically. So it feels like an outdoor zone. But if you look up, you see this big old glowing crystal thing. So it's like very strange. But because it's an underground expansion basically, then a lot of the creatures are of the more creepy crawly kind.
Spooky.
Especially spiders.
Yep.
And a lot of people just have a real strong reaction to spiders. And so like a bad one.
Like a uncontrollable.
Like I hate this.
Visceral.
I hate this. And I'm turning it off, And so they're adding an arachnophobia filter. Where you check that box and it swaps all the spiders out with crabs.
Nice. Actually, I saw there was an indie horror game recently that was big. I can't remember which one it was. Where they just swapped out. They have an arachnophobia mode also, and they just swapped out spiders for the word spider. So like this big like 3D text comes up and just like comes towards you and it just says spider.
So it's a spider, but you don't have to
look at
it. That it's a spider.
Yeah.
So you never know with that kind of stuff. But yes, but I think Adam, you're right that especially with sounds, there are certain things that can really take away from the experience. I've also I've had games where I've played it for a long time and they'll change some sound that's like a core part of the experience to something else where like maybe it becomes less sort of opinionated. Like maybe it was like a really sharp, big sound before, and now it's kind of like, kind of a thing. And that really changes the feel of things. Yeah. And oftentimes in a way where I'm just like, I thought the original one was too much, but now that it feels like this, I hate this. Like it felt better when it was big and it felt like something was really happening,
I think the biggest thing for me on these notes it's not just the like the interperson variability that makes all this challenging as far as like decision making around it. Because especially when you have, as soon as a demo meets players or whatever else, you're going to have, you just get a lot of feedback from people, and some of which is very particular, right? But I think in general, sharp sounds are, you got to be real careful with. Sort of the biggest takeaway from me, where it's like something that kind of like pierces.
Loud, high pitches.
Or just like too sharp is I guess the only word I have for it. But
you can go too sharp. You can also go too soft. Like if you've got like an explosion sound in your game, but it's just like, poof, right? Mm-hmm. That is kind of like some things just need that sharpness to them, but they can't be things that are happening all the time, or else it's just people just go nuts.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the interesting thing, right? Is a lot of the sound tweaking that we've had to do is not based on the sound itself, as in like experiencing the sound in the moment in the game once, and you're like, oh, this is perfect. Mm-hmm. This is what the sound should be, right?
Yeah.
But that's not the player experience. The player experience is interacting with that thing
1,000
times, and it could be that if they're experiencing that sound like 10 seconds or more apart, that it stays perfect the whole time. It could even be that if it happens in rapid succession constantly, it's still perfect. But usually it only works actually perfectly in exactly one way, which is, the way that the player actually experiences it. And so a lot of like the back and forth on the sound design stuff is you design the sound for like what feels like it's going to be the best for what the specific purpose is. I need an explosion. I need a death sound. I need a whatever, right? Then you go in the game and see what happens, and then you tweak it again. Yep. And then you play the game like a player would, and see
sometime later. Mm-hmm. You get some notes,
tweak it
like,
again.
Hey, I know we already changed this a little bit, but it makes
let's do it again.
Exactly. Yeah. In full context, it somehow doesn't work.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, there's still plenty of sounds in Crashlands 2 where I'm like, we need to swap these,
It's like with any other aspect of the game, right?
Because like that's true of everything in the game. Like there's still a bunch of stuff in the game where I'm like, this is not quite there yet, It's iterative, and you never know until it's in there.
Yeah, well, that's a hard process too, right? Because the difference between the first-time player experience, or even a player playing the whole last game, and the developer experience of replaying certain portions of the game endlessly over years, right? Is something you also have to take into account when you're doing this. And to some extent, you have to basically design that for both. It has to work in both cases, because if you're driving your dev team insane, right, with some of the design choices that don't work in the dev context,
if you're
then they're going to do worse work. Yeah, so it has to work there and for the player, and so it's just like with all the rest of the game.
Or you provide shortcuts, right? It's stuff like if you're a dev, we don't have a way to skip like a death animation, for example. So if you forgot to turn invincibility on, you take a straight hit from something when you're just like poking around, you gotta wait for the death animation to finish, before you can pop back in the dev tools. That is going to make it really feel like if you get any kind of complaint from anybody about, hey, the death animation feels like it's kind of long or something, you're like, yeah, fuck that, blow it up, because it's like your experience of it is not what the player's experience of it is, which is typically far more stretched apart and in the context of playing a game, not trying to get some work done, which is a very different feeling.
Which is also an important thing when you're talking about feedback again, right? Like as you're saying, the feedback that you're going to feel like you agree with is the stuff that feels like it aligns with your experience playing the game completely differently from how players play it. And so your bias towards what you change and what you fix is going to be towards that stuff, even if that's not actually like the common feedback, right? It'll be the things you'll be like, oh yeah, that sounds right, because that's also been my experience. Even if it's actually fine and most players actually prefer it that way.
Yep. Yeah, and everything has a push pull. Change one thing in one direction, and it'll improve in one dimension, but it might get worse in another. So
nothing is just true. Nothing is just good. Some things are just bad, but that's also still pretty rare.
Balance.
Very complicated.
That's all we're here for.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you much for the questions, and that's all the time we have for this week's episode. I would like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, you could just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And as always, if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam, give Crashlands 2 a wish list, check out the demo. All that stuff helps boost the game's visibility, and we'll hope to have a successful launch, and we'd appreciate it. So thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.